Well, we are finally, hopefully, doing it. The second edition of the family podcast for the summer pod.
Yeah. We're back. This is about to be a fall pod.
It's kind of where we're at. Just so you know, we have tried to shoot several of these and something quit.
We had some
Technical difficulties.
Yeah.
So we apologize for the big old gap there. We're doing the best we can. Did I say that pathetic enough? That's
yeah,
good.
That was really nice.
So this summer we are attempting to, or at least what's left of the summer, we are attempting to tackle some questions sent in by y'all. And so we are excited. So today we're going to start on our first one, and it's a doozy. It's a bit of a doozy.
It was a big one?
It is a big one, yeah.
But just imagine we had this recorded for last week.
I know. Well, we did. We did have this set to go out a while ago.
Yeah.
But it still feels timely, so let's just dive in.
Yeah.
And see what happens.
Sure.
Well, I'm Becca. I'm the pastor of Family Ministries here at Katy First.
I'm Mark. I'm the senior pastor here at Katy First.
Welcome to the Katy First Family Podcast, where we offer ideas, inspiration, and encouragement to help you and your family grow as joyful disciples of Jesus Christ. This summer, we are getting into the questions you've submitted, and today's question is, I would love to hear your thoughts on and how the church should be responding to the rising tide of Christian nationalism. The loudest Christian voices seem to be on the wrong side of history and leading down a path that is divergent from Christ's teachings. So, specifically aiming at the question is, here are thoughts on and how the church should be responding to the rising tide of Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
So we're going to kind of break that down into some pieces. First, what is Christian nationalism?
Yeah.
How does that interplay with our faith?
Mm-hmm.
And then how should the church be responding?
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Mm-hmm.
So we looked up a bit of a definition for Christian nationalism, and this is coming from, there's lots of sources on this, but the one that we ended up, the definition that we thought was the most succinct and clear to understand, came from actually another podcast, Straight White American Jesus. What a title for a podcast. They say that Christian nationalism is an ideology that is based around the idea that this is a Christian nation, that this was founded as a Christian nation, and therefore it should be a Christian nation today and should be so in the future. I think it's worth saying, too, that according to survey data of people who identify as being Christian nationalists, they agree with statements like the federal government should declare the United States of America a Christian nation, that our laws should be based on Christian values, and I think most strikingly that being a Christian is important if you want to be a, quote, real American.
Yeah.
So that's the, I think, best condensed, well said version of what Christian nationalism is. Yeah. Basically, it's a weird conglomeration of American, in our case, and Christian that says you cannot be a real American if you are not a Christian, and pushing your specific idea of Christian values onto everyone else at a federal legal level.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. And I think, it's funny, even reading this, I think it's, obviously it's accurate, and it still feels like a little but there's more.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of get into the more.
That's why this one, I think it was, I appreciate that the actual beginning of this person's thing was, I don't know if you want to wade into it.
Yeah, right.
I was like, sure, we will. We're not afraid. But I think it might be important to, having sort of identified now at the start what Christian nationalism is, let's go ahead and say what it's also not.
Right, yeah.
It's not necessarily just being proud to be an American or considering yourself patriotic.
Right.
It's not serving your country in a certain way, right? So if you're in the armed forces or some kind of public servant, that's not the same thing as Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
What else? How else would we want to draw that line? What isn't Christian nationalism?
Yeah, I just think in general, people's sense of patriotism, pride in the country, all this sort of stuff. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
Though this easily gets conflated, and Christian nationalism will leverage off of that for most people to sway you over to a much more extreme and narrowed vision of what it means for us to be Americans.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously that is not, those things aren't what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know. There's probably more that we could add to that, but I think people will get that general concept.
I just think it's important. Sorry, my watch is binging me because I'm waiting on a repairman, of course. But I think it's important to say that we don't. I hope I'm not speaking for you. I think we've talked about this before. Well, I know we've talked about this before because we tried to record. But we don't think that it's a sin to be patriotic.
Oh, yeah.
I definitely think there's people that err on that side, right? Like they go, I actually have a pastor friend who doesn't vote. Mm. And to me, I understand I understand because he's explained it to me. I don't agree with that personally, but I'm also not here throwing stones.
Yeah.
But I just feel like it is important to say it's not a sin to be patriotic. It's not even a staple of, you don't have to be unpatriotic in order to want a separation of church and state.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like it's important. Well, we grew up in a house that was very comfortable talking about politics. My dad was a lobbyist. And sometimes I don't think I've told you this before. He would come every year and do a little talk to the 7th grade class.
I think you did tell me this before.
Because that's the Texas history year is when is in 7th grade. And so he would come and talk about state politics, because for a while he was a lobbyist at the state level.
Yeah.
And so that was always kind of cool. Also, I felt the year he came, I was there, I knew all of the politicians that he was like, do you know who your governor is, or your lieutenant governor?
Yeah, he had all the answers.
I knew that, but it was because he talked about it. And so I'm not usually uncomfortable talking about politics. In fact, sometimes maybe I'm a little too comfortable.
Yeah.
Because I assume people disagree with me, and I don't have a problem with that. So I'm saying that to say I don't think that that you have to. That it doesn't look like one thing, right? But the specific question was about the rising tide of Christian nationalism and how that's divergent from Christ's teachings.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to talk about how Christian nationalism is harmful.
Yep.
I think it's harmful both to our government and to our faith.
Yeah.
And it makes me mad in both directions.
Yeah.
But it especially makes me mad when we talk about it in the damage I think it does to our faith.
Yeah.
I think that, I've told you this before, I get the most angry at pastors because they're
the worst.
Because they're the worst. They have a sacred responsibility. They're not mine to police. I'm not worried about that part.
Yeah.
But I think people give pastors a lot of trust, and that trust is often abused, I feel like, just in general, and that really bothers me. That's such a mild way of saying it. I'm trying not to be crazy angry person.
Yeah.
But I feel like if you hold, or if you tell people that you hold the keys to heaven and hell, you're able to manipulate them.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not what you think you're doing or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people have, even with Christian nationalism, have a decent intention. Right? Or it started that way at the very least. Mm-hmm. But you cannot separate Christian nationalism from white supremacy. And the damage that this does to our neighbors, minorities, people of color, people of different faiths, the damage that it does is... there's no way that's Christ-like.
Yeah.
And I feel like things get taken and turned in such a way that you feel an obligation. You have to want your country to be, for lack of a better word, like a theocracy, right? You have to want that or you're not a good Christian. I feel like that's how people get like convinced.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think, it's funny, since we've been talking about this, particularly now since we've recorded it on our second time.
Yeah.
I think before Christian nationalism has really kind of taken rise and even like now is like owned by certain Christian voices.
Yes.
Like it's not just a thing, a label, and now it's like that's what I am. That's exactly what I want.
Yeah.
Before that, I would hear language of what I heard was American civil religion. Did you ever hear about this in seminary or anything? American civil religion, which I feel like is kind of one degree down from Christian nationalism. Okay. American civil religion is basically that makes a kind of an idol and even a religiousness out of patriotism. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I say it's a degree away because it's still pretty broad in general, in the sense that you maybe wouldn't name exactly Christianity, but a very strong sense of like even the founding of our country is these kind of like founding myths that have sort of a religious overtone.
Right. The
American exceptionalism, America as this like one shining hill that's God's sacred country, and so this is already a foundation that where you can then just take it and apply it more narrowly into a Christian nationalist view. Mm-hmm. And in both of those worlds, criticism of the nation is pushed away because it's also seen as not only unpatriotic but ungodly. Mm-hmm. And how a perfect example why it's not great doesn't fit Christianity is because our scriptures are full of self-criticism, mm-hmm. from the prophets to Jesus himself. Mm-hmm. And so it cultivates this such narrow, rigid, fear-based, and as you've already said, rooted in a very, particularly like a white supremacy, mm-hmm. And a vision of America that fits that. And anything outside of that box is not only un-American, but it's probably ungodly. And it develops a fear-based, legalistic mindset, mm-hmm. that's borrowing the name of Christianity but looks nothing like it. Mm-hmm. Like John Wesley would say of his fear of what Methodist would become, people have the form of religion but don't know the power of it. Mm-hmm. This is the same thing in a sense of like Christian nationalism is borrowing the name Christianity to intermix and try to make a stronger, powerful, more rigid world. And it looks nothing like the humility, self-giving, other-focused, even self-critical in a good way, Christianity. Mm-hmm. It looks nothing like it. Mm-hmm. And so, I think the only time as a pastor that, like after January 6th, I preached that following Sunday, and for like the first time in a pulpit named that and named all those things, and it was just right in the aftermath of that. Yeah. And I'll say in some sense there was a lot of really good feedback, and then I got a few people like, "What is Christian nationalism?" And that mm-hmm. was 2001. So it was
definitely not 2001.
2021. Yeah, 2021, not 2001. So, it is a relatively new thing, as this question says. It's this rise.
Yes.
That with any of those things, they can be so sort of broad. I think it's one of the reasons it's hard to name.
Yeah.
But now we're in a moment that, like we said, it's sort of solidified itself in certain circles.
I mean, I think it's one of those things where I see it historically. So I was a history major in undergrad. So I find it odd when we talk about the U.S. as being an intentionally Christian nation.
Yeah.
because I don't think that was the primary motivation for the founders of the U.S.
Yeah.
Certainly was not the foundation for the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. Because the founders, then this is a thing we learned like when I was in public school back. I don't know if they teach it anymore, but the founders were deist.
Yeah.
Or were largely deist. Which is this idea sort of a clockmaker God who comes in and creates everything and sets everything in motion and then is hands off.
Yeah. And just lets the clock work.
Yeah. It's just going like it's going to go and not involved, which is not what we would say is how God works in the world, right? That's not how we would perceive the nature and work of God.
Yeah.
And so, and then famously, like Thomas Jefferson cutting out things in the Bible that he didn't like, didn't agree with, didn't think should be there, whatever.
Yeah.
Just intentionally editing it to fit his own idea.
Yeah.
Which is it's so ironic to me that some of the same people are like, you can't pick and choose what's in the Bible. And then they're like, yeah, the founders were Christian. You need to match these up.
Yeah.
Like, make it make sense. Because I just don't think it's that, it's just not that cut and dry.
Yeah.
Depending on who you're talking about as originally being in the United States, geographically. And so still a wide variety of religions and religious expressions. And the United States has always been about people coming in, and people of different faiths, different backgrounds, different cultures, different socioeconomic, it's always been this really big, it's supposed to be like a melting pot, right?
Yeah.
And so it's odd to me that we would go, this is what was intended. Well, okay, maybe it was, but it was set up sort of like the clockwork situation with God, that it would evolve, that it was supposed to evolve. Mm-hmm. It's why amendments were possible, Constitution, blah, blah. Anyway, I don't want to get too into the weeds. I just find it odd because it's such an easy bubble to burst.
Yeah.
To be like, yeah, no, really, that's not what it was.
Yeah.
And yet I feel like people, I think sometimes we're so convinced that we have a monopoly. I think this is true for every person.
Yeah.
The idea that I have is so solidly right that we just, our confirmation bias is way too strong, right? So we only hear the things that would confirm what we already believe to be true. And I think one of the important things we always have to be doing, and one of the things I think we see God doing and Christ doing in the Bible is actually, I do see, I don't know if I would say that I see God changing, but even look back at Old Testament and God's interactions with, say, Abraham, right? And God changes God's mind, or seems to. Yeah. Maybe that's not exactly what's happening, but we can see that things don't have to be set in stone, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Yeah. That we should be having conversations with one another that help us to evolve. And if we decide that this way and this particular interpretation or this particular way of being is the only right way, I think not only do we miss out on something beautiful, we miss out on something that I think we miss out on something that God intended us to be able to enjoy.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of that made sense.
Yeah, well, and I even think we can't even agree on what Christian is.
Oh yeah,
point.
Yeah.
So even if there was a world where this was, a reality that was implemented, well, whose version of Christianity are we talking about?
Yeah.
In what way are we talking about it?
Yeah.
And so there's just there's so many things that are problematic with it, both from the faith side and from the political government side of it, that just don't match with what our country was actually founded on, and the trajectory that the founding fathers wanted it to go in. So you can take it from the political side of no, this isn't, and certainly I think from the Christian side that goes, absolutely not. This is not a thing that is good. Yeah. So a question I have for you is, if we are in, what would be some of the red flags that we might look for that either are red flags that are there's the seeds of at least what would take you to Christian nationalism, or the red flags of like, no, this is like some of the rhetoric that I need to be mindful of that fits in what we're talking about?
I think one thing that I would look for is if you walk in and there's a lot of intentionally divisive talk, dividing talk.
Yeah.
So an us versus them kind of mentality.
Yeah.
That is, I would say, not Christ-like and also not helpful.
Yeah.
And definitely, I think how the path starts, right? We alone have the right answers. Mm-hmm. Also, even if it's not Christian nationalism, that is definitely cult language, so be aware. So either way, red flag. If there's an us versus them, if they keep saying things like countercultural, but not explaining what that means, you should ask some questions.
Yeah.
If you can't question the person who's speaking into the microphone, red flag.
Yeah.
Just because somebody has a mic doesn't mean that they're right.
Yeah.
And if they're afraid of your questions, or if they tell you that your faith is weak because you have questions, I would not just say that's a red flag. I would say that's a leave situation.
Yeah. If
you're that's the feedback that you're getting from somebody, whether it's in a small group, in a church, in any organization, we can't question leadership.
Yeah.
That you don't need to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have other ones?
No, I mean, I think the ones that you named are probably the number ones I would name too. It always makes me think of the Benjamin Crimmer quote that says, if your faith makes you see a world full of enemies to be hated as opposed to neighbors to be loved, there's your red flag. And I think that feels like number one, like the first thing that's going to go. And then that sense of like exceptionalism and no humility, no questions asked. These are all red flags anywhere for sure. I think they fall in line into the Christian nationalism that is going to do the same thing. Yeah. And try to, make an idol out of this, out of our country and what it means.
I think a lot of people, so I think of like my great-grandparents, my grandparents. I was thinking about my grandfather a lot lately, and he fought in World War II, and he would definitely, he passed away several years ago, but I wonder what our conversations would look like now, because I think for him growing up, there was this idea of to be a good citizen meant to go to church. Yeah. And the way that those things were intertwined, I think that had a lot to do with like the need to come together against this common enemy in Hitler. And I think that's real. I don't think that should be, I think there's so much confusion there because Hitler was both a government and an evil dude. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Like those are intertwined. And so I think that makes it easier to intertwine your goodness as a citizen or even as a participant in the world and your faith. Those become intertwined. And I would say that it's not easy to pull those apart. The gospel is very political, and to pretend that it's not is foolish. Yeah. It is political. It's not American. Nobody who wrote anything in the Bible, the words Jesus said, I guess that may be different, but like nobody who put pen to paper during the writing of the Bible, Old or New Testament, had any idea about this like America-shaped continent. Yeah. Like they didn't. And while the Bible has lots of good things to tell us about life now, what it didn't do was intentionally try to address every facet of what we would call now modern life. Yeah. There's just no way for it to do that. And so we have to interpret it. Of course we do. Yeah. We have to. That's how it works. And so we can't say that the Bible's not political. The Bible is definitely talking about like empire, right? And Jesus is killed by the Roman Empire. And yet it's odd how 300 years later, then the church is like messed up in that empire. And I think it's important to call that out, to know that bit of our both political and Christian history. church history, the way that these things get mixed up. And I think it's important to ask yourself the question, who is like really in charge here? Or maybe a better way to say is, who profits from this? And I don't mean it necessarily in cash, because power is a pretty powerful currency. I didn't need to use power two different ways there. But if somebody can convince you that they are right and you should support them, now they have power. They have person power, right? And so we have to be asking the question, like, who does this really benefit?
Yeah.
And as a Christian, we should be wanting things that we enact, the way that we live, to benefit as many people as possible.
Yeah.
We're always going to be limited. And I don't mean that like we're limited because Christ is limited. I don't mean that at all. I mean we're limited in our humanity and the scope of things. But I do believe God is making all things new. And so I think we should be asking, like, those red flags. Who is it that's benefiting from this?
Yeah.
Who is it, like, that we're actually trying to glorify in this? Who is it that we're caretaking for in this? And if that is real narrow,
right,
then that's not the gospel.
Yeah.
That's not Christ-like.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's fair to say this moment, and this question in particular, is dealing with Christian nationalism. And it'll resurface again in some other name in some other place. I mean, it has for centuries and centuries. And so I think the things we're talking about are important for now in this particular topic.
Yeah.
And but rooted in Scripture, this is what Scripture's always been telling us about any form of empire or power that is trying to take claim and using God to do it, and in doing so, consolidating all power for a small group of people.
Yep.
Our scriptures are full. I mean, they're mainly written and addressed to this situation. And it'll come again in a different name. It makes me think of Star Wars.
Okay.
Because what's that lady's name? Anyway, she says, I've seen the Empire, and he starts naming all the different versions of the New Order and this and that. So Star Wars people know what I'm talking about.
I'm sorry. I like Star Wars, but I didn't get that reference.
Yeah.
But I believe you.
But yeah, just like the different like it'll go by a different name, it'll come a different thing.
Yeah. Yes.
And these have always been part of the things that Jesus has been, not only in the prophets, and not only trying to help us see this is damaging, but then to re-empower people into a better way of humility and love, even when that runs against what you're going to see.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the beauty of, that's why this Christian nationalism is just so frustrating, because it really does steal a name and knows nothing about what that name is supposed to look like. Yeah.
It's it's harming the church, because it is massively damaging to our witness.
Yeah.
Because people rightly hear that and go, I don't want to worship any God who does this.
Yeah.
Or I don't trust people if they're saying this.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like uncomfortable sometimes in certain spaces where I don't know. I want to tell people I'm a Christian, but not that kind of Christian. That's not a good place to be in.
Yeah.
But it's also really damaging to not just our Christian witness, to actual people, as it puts into place things that intentionally harm anybody who's outside of the circle that, we should just like call it out.
Yeah.
Anybody who's not white, anybody who's not male, anybody who's not straight. Those are the people in this particular instance who are most likely to profit. And they will ride on whatever coattails they have to. They'll walk all over anybody. They'll do whatever they have to. And it's wild. I just feel like I don't want to make it so, I don't want to accidentally make it like less than it is. Do you know what I mean? Where I want to be clear how insidious I actually see this. Does that make sense? The second part of this question that I think is important for us to talk about as we're kind of wrapping up here is how should the church be responding? And I think that is critical.
Yeah.
I think we do have to call it out. It's partly why I'm kind of being so, I feel like I'm being intense in the way that I'm talking about it. I think we have to call it out when we see it. And I think we have to be clear and say things like, that is not what I read in Scripture.
Yeah.
No, you don't get to just take the name of God and carry it like a banner and have no one challenge you about it.
Yeah.
We have to out loud with the things we say and do push back.
Yeah. Yeah. In our first recording of this, I think particularly in churches, being able to cultivate spaces where we can talk about this with one another. And that doesn't necessarily mean like, hey, let's sit down and have this hard conversation. But, and maybe it does. But just to say that, like, when we can sit and talk with each other and work through these things, and especially something like this where
it's tough.
there's not one definition on it somewhere out there.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a word and that's how things happen with little movements like this. They eventually solidify. But so, I think being able to talk about them in churches, in Sunday schools and groups in ways that we can empower, this is what we're not, kind of like what we're talking about. And, as necessary, you can do it from a pulpit, I think, for sure. But certainly not all the time.
Yeah.
And I just don't think, I think there's a time for clarity of, here's maybe something that needs to be said, but these are conversation things. And pulpits tend to be one-sided.
Right.
Most of the time. So, I think those are some of the everyday things that we could be doing.
Yeah.
And churches can be doing. And partly just raising the flag on it. Not letting it hide over in the corner as this little thing that we don't need to talk about.
Yeah.
Raise the flag on it.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Yeah, because it has kind of snuck in, I think. And then I think that is partly what's confused people.
Yeah.
I saw a post over the holiday weekend, so 4th of July. That's how late we're able to get this done. That talked about how the person was a pastor, a UMC pastor. And I'm not 100% sure I'm getting this exactly right. But they talked about how they were celebrating the 4th, but mindful that while they're always proud to be an American, they're not always proud of everything America does. And I think that kind of nuance I think that could set some people off, and that's okay. It's okay as long as we keep having conversations about it.
Yeah.
I would say that personally, I don't always feel like I would label myself as being patriotic, but I'm not sure that's really true, because I do have a strong civic sense of responsibility, and I do feel like a lot of it is fueled by my understanding of how Christ would call me to be in the world, but I don't think that means that it's my job to make everybody be like me, or to believe exactly how I believe.
Yeah.
And I think that it's good to be the kind of person who can move in such a way that is, live in such a way that is constantly looking for the good, for the most amount of people.
Yeah.
I think that's what America's supposed to be too.
Yeah. And I would, what you just said made me think of something. This isn't going to be compelling for a lot of people. But even if you're of the mindset that you wanted, and it imposes the wrong word, you wanted everyone and everything to become Christian.
Yeah.
Well, our scriptures are pretty, at least in Jesus and the way he talked about the kingdom of God, was pretty explicit that it's not a top-down thing. It's a little seed that grows. It's a
That's good.
Little yeast. So even if that were your mindset, take a cue from the scriptures there that the best approach to it is always going to be from the bottom up.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, you should definitely not be in favor of a top-down government imposing Christianity.
Yeah.
It just doesn't align with what Jesus said it would happen.
Yeah, that's interesting.
If that was your mindset.
No, that's a good thought. I think this is it is a tough conversation. And I think with all of the questions we're going to tackle this summer, I think it's important for everybody to know, like, because clearly somebody in the church was thinking this, right? Or we wouldn't have gotten the question. We are so open to more conversations. If this has sparked something in you,
absolutely, and
you want to come chat about it, or you want some clarity on something we've said or whatever, we are so open to that. Because I do feel like we hold a lot of things together at Katy First. And so for sure, there's people who are probably wishing right now that we had been like way more hard-nosed about it. And there are probably people who are uncomfortable about what we did say. And that's, I don't want to say that's okay. I mean, it's good.
It just is. Yeah,
it is. Like, we're going to hold
part of being in a community
yes. And everybody, like, I think this is partly what I learned definitely from my dad, who my dad and I now have differing political and religious views to some extent. But we're still in really good relationship. It's still my dad that I reach for when I need somebody to, like, catch me. We're not distant from each other just because there are some things in which we disagree. And some of those things are big things. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that we don't love, care, and are devoted to each other. And so I think that can be true of all of us here at Katy First, too. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you have found some inspiration and encouragement for yourself and for your family. If you'd like to get our podcast delivered directly to you each week, we hope each week. We're trying so hard for each week.
You know,
you can
weekly-ish.
You can subscribe or follow us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify. For more information about Katy First and upcoming events for your family, you can visit our website at katyfirst.org. Most importantly, we want you to know this, that in the middle of your ordinary, messy life, whatever that looks like for you right now, you are not alone, you are doing a good job, and you are so loved.
And we hope you'll join us on Sunday or back right here next week. You hear it right here. We're committing to it.
We're calling it.
With another topic that's been submitted, another question. So have a good week.